And we are live. This is another week of white noise. I'm not white, but I got the noise. So I have my friend Jay Wamstead, the teacher, educator, PhD, Dr. Jay is in the house. And we are going to talk this week about all of these think pieces that come out for white folks, for white teachers, for white people, how to be a better white person, how to be a better ally, how to be a white teacher that doesn't mispronounce names, how to whatever. Just fill in the blank with all of those.
That is an important one. I don't think we're talking about that tonight, but we should at some point talk about how names matter.
I mean, it was one of the think pieces that came out, and I remember thinking, wow, this is pretty specific in terms of, giving advice to another group of people, like, how to pronounce names right. I didn't know it was such a problem, but it is. Apparently, it's a bigger problem than I would have thought. So, yeah. Anyways, where we left off last time, just at the end of last time, we started talking about white tears in the classroom. We called it Karens in the classroom, I think it was.
Crying Karens in the classroom.
Crying Karens in the classroom. And you were like, whoa, 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 whoa. I want to come back to that. That was last time around. We didn't have any time to come back to it then. So what did you want? Why did you think that was important to come back to?
Well, so you've mentioned it several times on A Black Hands recently. And I have some of my own thoughts and kind of stories connected to it. I cry. I do cry, but not in public. I'm in private crier.
Yeah.
But I have my own. I have a question for you about it. But first, I just would like you to. Crying Karens in the classroom is a pretty, it's pretty forward phrase. And I would like you to unpack it for a second, and then I'm gonna ask you a question about my own story with white tears.
All right. So in general, the idea about Karen as a archetype, as a meme, Karen is the one with the asymmetrical haircut who wants to talk to your manager all the time, right? And feels totally over entitled to have her way, wants to return something without a receipt. And if you say no and start telling her what the policies are, she wants to see your manager specifically because she knows she has the privilege card. She can pull it out and things will go her way. So that's not what we're talking about in the classroom, because I don't think the teachers are like that. I don't think that's the Karen syndrome. There is a little bit of that. I think there's a little bit of the white teacher who calls the principal, in the same way the person calls the manager. I don't think that's what you're talking about, though. It's not. No. I imagine from the inside, I probably could see more of that type of behavior, right, from the inside. But as a father, as a person who has, gone and sat with people and talked to other guys, at times, this came up one time, like, man, this one time I was in a conference and blah, blah, blah. And she started crying in the conference because she was so, sad about some of the information she had to give me or whatnot. And I froze. This isn't me talking. This was actually a friend saying this to me. And I froze. And I'm like, what the hell am I supposed to do? I'm a grown ass black man sitting here with this white woman crying in a thing. And you start thinking different things. Like, I hope nobody walks by and thinks there's a problem or blah, blah,
Yeah.
It was funny because when he said that, then it like bells rang off like, oh, you've had that situation too? Wow, this must be a thing. Now I'll tell you,
and I'm bringing it up because on 8 Black Hands, again, it might have been a month ago now that I heard y'all talk about it, but like all y'all were talking about it. I mean, it was everybody had their own story about, I think Ankrum was talking about being a principal and having a teacher, burst into tears, blah, blah, blah. And Almeki had the same story. And anyway, so like, that's why we're talking about this, because all y'all had the same story about that.
That's right. So those two as principals have seen it from the inside.
Yeah.
And then, I've seen it as a parent from the outside. And in the conversation I was just talking about, like, was as a dad, like other dads, like, you feel kind of like you're going into a feminized space anyways. Like, and I'm so much more comfortable in schools now. My oldest is like almost 30. So, some of this is from my first kid, when I was way more green. But I can just remember feeling like, man, this is not my joint. This is not, I have no business being here right now because this is crazy. But the other way that I've seen it too. So this is the the version of "Let me see your manager." I'll say this: when it becomes so much about like I try so hard and the crying and the centering of self in as the victim, right? When in actuality, you're really pretty privileged, right? As low as you think your pay is, as little as you think of respect you're getting in your job and whatnot, on your worst day, you're still 10 times more privileged than some of the people that we're trying to get out of a hole who might be in your classrooms, right?
Yeah.
So when you start crying, and you know that white tears and white women tears historically have meant that everybody stops, right? Like it's kind of like it's ingrained in us. The most delicate thing in America is a white woman, and when she cries, when that flower wilts, everybody stops.
Yeah, and as a white man, our ability to cry in public is complicated. And as I know, the ability of any person, black man or woman, crying in public is even more complicated than me, probably. So I'm not a big fan, as you know, of Robin DiAngelo and White Fragility. But she has a pretty good chapter on white tears. It's real short. And it's in the middle, and I'm gonna read a quote from it because you pretty much said this, but she wrote this in her book. She said, since many of us have not learned how racism works and our role in it, our tears may come from shock and distress about what we didn't know or recognize. For people of color, however, our tears demonstrate our racial institution and privilege, which is the word you just used, privilege. And so this is what, so I read this chapter a couple years ago, and I listened to you the other day. And what's hard about this for a white educator who's talking to lots of other people about anti-racism work and learning is we are supposed to figure out how to, for lack of a better word, lament. And that's the word that Michael Eric Dyson uses in his really good book, Tears We Cannot Stop. And he uses the word lament, and specifically admonishing white people to learn how to lament. And I think, so I'm always like kind of like both handing certain white people. I think there's a certain amount of like white tears that is insidious and dangerous, and it's like a get out of jail free card. I was just playing Monopoly with my kids and spent half the time in jail trying to get out, right? And that's what tears are in those uncomfortable moments for some white women. I know that, but I think for some of them, it's a ingrained sense of I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to do better, and I'm trying to figure out what lamenting looks like. So I'm going to throw that back to you, and then I'm going to tell you a story. So take it back for a second. When you say lamenting,
I feel like that's like the old school, almost Yiddish. So what is the lamenting part that you're talking about? Like, what does that look like to lament?
Well, he uses, I mean, so, you know, Dyson is a Christian, I guess. So he's deliberately used it. I mean, the book's subtitled A Sermon to White America, I think. He's using a lot of like actual Christian words. And I guess lament is one of those like old school Old Testament words. I guess, and I think he means it the way I think, at least the way I take it, is that lamenting is about taking something in. And so as a white person, we've talked about this, we're raised to not see race around us. We're raised to not learn about our history as oppressors. We're raised to not think about our, starting on third base. And we were raised to think that we already hit that triple, right? Not that we were born there. And so lamenting is taking the information in, all that I just said, in a complicated process of learning. And then, like to get even worse would be like repenting. That's an even worse word. Because now we're way off in like religious language. But I guess sorrow, to me, lamenting is it's a true acceptance of your complicity in the system, not a head knowledge, but a heart knowledge. And I think lots of white people get that head knowledge. And they never move on to that heart knowledge. They never see themselves in the story. They just see the story.
All right. Well, that's helpful background.
But you're rolling your eyes. So,
well, no, I'm trying to think about it. Like, I'm trying to think about, here's the deal. You don't ever want to beat up on anybody for crying. right? So so I should just clarify a couple of things. Like one, this stuff comes out way too on the nose, and it's just the way that I talk, right? It's just the way that I say things. But spend 10 minutes with me aside from this type of discussion, and you might like poke a different way for me to think or whatever. So you don't ever want to like give anybody a hard time for crying, right? Because crying is what it is. It would be like giving somebody a hard time for sweating, right?
Yes.
Now, I think like one of the pieces I sent you does talk about some historical, racial contextualization of the white tears in the classroom that is worth study. That is worth talking about and study. At the same time, though, like just in a post-racial world, we will just all be human, and crying is human, and that will just be okay. So we have to talk about this like in a sophisticated manner. We have to like just put that out there that just for purposes of intellectualizing this, we're going to talk about this academic way of looking at white tears in the classroom because there is some context to it that's important, right? Okay, so I just want to say that first. The other thing is, I also want to say that there are different kinds of white people. I always forget to say this when I say things like white people this and white people that and whatnot. From my own experience, just in my life, from my own experience, there have been way different kinds of white people, right? And my punk rock white friends and my gutter punk white friends and my metal white friends are all different than each other. And they're definitely different than my professional white friends, right? In my professional lives. I have some white friends in my professional lives who look very professional today, but were just like me back in the day. They had punk rock roots, and it'll only come up when we start talking about music or something.
And which this isn't the time, but we need to talk deeper about that later. Okay.
Absolutely. So, but I mean, I'll say something like, you know, because you and I did talk, I think, a little bit about I worked at First Avenue and the bands that came through there or whatever, you know, and a band like Bad Brains or Fishbone is not something that everybody listened to or knew. So you'll bump into somebody and they'll go, oh man, blah, blah, blah. And especially if they start saying what concert they went to or whatnot, you know that. So these are different passports that different kinds of white people have. Yeah. I'm not bringing that up to start that discussion. It's just to say, maybe when you say Karen, you are talking about a very specific kind of white person too. Because I don't think like my ex-punk rock friends that would be in a classroom today would be breaking down and crying about, you know, how hard they try or whatever. It's a little bit too delicate for them. So I'll say that. I don't know if that adds any type of decent context to your question, what you're saying, but I do think that there's a healthy dose, a healthy number of the fragile, self-centering personality type that when something goes wrong, maybe it's the first time that they've ever failed at something. Yeah. When something's really hard, maybe it's the first time that they've really felt challenged to the point where they don't know what to do. You know, maybe their whole life they knew what to do or had somebody who can help them find what to do. And, you know, it's the first super difficult situation where they're not all that, you know. I think TFA has had this problem with some of their people because they go for really bright people. They used to. And I think, you know, they go for a broader audience now. But I think what they found was that you have a very high number of people who have excelled in life. So if you put them in a classroom and then they fail, they freak out. Like they don't know what to do. They don't
especially, I mean, I don't know what it's like now, but a couple years ago when the school I was at had a contract with TFA, they were at the height of their getting the best kids in the country. I mean, like those kids that came into TFA were rock stars there for 5 or 6 years. And I've consoled several crying TFA people. I shared a wall with a string of TFAs. I was about to say children. They're not children, but they were much younger than me. With a string of TFA teachers for years, and many of them cried. Which at least they were alone. I mean, you know, like they held it together till the kids left. So, so let me. So I want to tell you a story. So I was trying to think about. I was in a workshop recently, and I was trying to think about what white tears looks like for somebody that doesn't cry, right? And now, again, I'm kind of a crier. Like I'm more of a crier than my wife, for instance, and which she would gladly acknowledge. But again, not in public, more in private. I can cry much easier at like a book or a movie than I can at real life, which just probably says something about some work I need to do with a psychologist. But I would never cry in public. I would never cry at school. I would never cry in front of a student or a parent or a colleague or anything. However, I was trying to think about what white tears would mean to me. And this story popped to mind. So if you can harken back to about 4 years ago, I don't know if you remember, we had a presidential election that everybody thought was going to go one way, and it went a different way, right? And like many of us, I was up super late watching the crazy show that was that night, and I went to bed and woke up really early to check for what I assumed was the reversal, and there was no reversal. And I went to school, and my experience at that school that day is a whole different ball of wax, because I could talk about that in a different time. As one of the like 3 white people in the whole building that year, I had like strange students coming up to me, like asking me if I voted for Trump, like with urgency, like children I did not know. But that's not this story. So this story is, I get through homeroom first period. I'm exhausted. I'm like frustrated and mad. I've been talking about the election for weeks, even though I'm a math teacher. My kids are asking me, they're all like, Wamstead, what happened? What happened? They want me to like explain it. And I'm like, I don't know. So my planning period, or maybe in between classes, I don't know, I walked 2 doors over to a colleague who was a very important colleague to me, because we just shared hall space for several years, and she used to buy books, and she would give me a book, and then we'd each read them, and then we'd trade them, and we'd sit in the hallway and talk. And I got lots of wonderful books from her and I had like a impromptu book club with her for years, and we had talked about the election for a year straight. I mean, ever since Trump was nominated. And I went down there and I just started, yelling at her, right? I'm railing in the hallway. It must have been during a planning period, because I felt like I did it forever. And I just was like, oh my God, and this is so bad, and this happened, and can you believe it? And can you believe this? And this, my colleague is Black. And I'm just ranting and raving like a unhinged. And she finally, feels like forever in my mind, but she like puts her hand out, and like, I don't know if she literally put her hand on my shoulder or if she like just metaphorically was like, stop. And she looked at me and she said, Wamstead, this might be the worst thing that's ever happened to you, but this is not the worst thing that's ever happened to us. And she like kind of, I don't know what she did. She like circled her fingers or something to make me realize she's talking about Black America, right? And she wasn't mean to me. She was very kind. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I'm acting crazy here, like yelling at you about this. She's like, we're going to be all right. You need to get yourself together. And anyway, it was later that I put words to this, and I tell that long story to say, what if white tears, a manifestation of it is white, that indignation, right? I think that what I did to my colleague that day is a lot like the D'Angelo quote, which I'll kind of just like read again real quick, because I grew up not knowing how racism works or my role in it. My indignation came from shock and distress about what I didn't know or recognize. I didn't see Trump for what he was until he got elected, right? I just thought he was a clown, a circus show that was going to pass. So for people of color, however, my indignation demonstrated privilege, right? I had the privilege to walk in there and be like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened in the whole world. And she was like, stop, like you're acting inappropriately, I guess is the better.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to bounce that story back to you. What do you think about that?
So, one thing that you also had the privilege of actually believing that the system was logical. Yeah. And the reason that you were upset was because the illogical happened, right? Yeah. The unthinkable, that made no sense whatsoever. Like if you had asked anybody the day before who trusted and believed in the system to death, like really believed in it, that outcome didn't make any sense. So I could see like why there was this SNL skit about this, and it was about you remember that with the Chappelle and Chris Rock, and they're sitting with the white folks, and it's about election night, and little by little the white folks are getting so like, I can't believe this, and Chris Rock
Chappelle's just like
laughing. Yeah, he's just like laughing, like you didn't know that this could happen, right? I feel that like that has a lot to do with recognizing that your unicorn isn't real. Recognizing that Santa Claus died at some point. These are things in which like you have a moment of of awakening that maybe Black folks had a lot earlier than you, right? Like maybe Black folks stopped believing in magic like earlier than you did. I like the handout though that she did. I like that you said that she was kind about it, and at the same time she was stopping you.
Yeah,
you know,
and she may have walked away and told a story about me. I mean, not meanly.
She probably did.
I mean, it didn't end our relationship. But she may have walked away and been like, "Man, Wamstead had it today." I don't know. I mean, but yeah, she was very kind, and I guess that like what that did for me is now she was a safe space. I don't know if that's the right word. We had a relationship.
You knew you could be vulnerable with her at all.
I mean, I wouldn't have walked up to just any Black person and started ranting about it. Like I needed somebody that
I hope not.
We had talked politics. We had talked politics. We talked policy. We had talked education. We had talked and talked and talked and talked for years. So to me, I guess my point is like, did I make a mistake? Like, yeah, sure. But like, was it a good learning experience for me? Yes. And I wonder if what we need to figure out is a way for white people to cry where it's constructive. It's not constructive the way you're talking about. Like when a parent goes in and the white teacher starts crying, like that is just so unhelpful to that parent.
You don't know what to do in that case, because sometimes the person, it would be like going to the doctor and the doctor asking you what they should do for their cold. In some ways, you're like looking at this person as the expert, and they're like telling you, I don't know what to do. I'm at my wit's end. I've tried so hard. I think I told you about this story here in Minneapolis. There's a school that whatever, like it's a school that when a lot of schools closed, they got a lot of students from other schools. We put a brand new principal in this school. This principal went there as like a reform and was going to like make this school everything. And after a couple of years of it, just sucking so bad, she changed her attitude about being a reformer and suddenly became kind of like the teacher's best friend. And they banded together around this like idea of like trauma porn and about how hard they have it and how much they love their babies. And, they started calling their students their babies, which was a real bad look to me. And our babies just are so hungry and they're so blah, blah, blah. And it was just all this kind of like middle-class white trauma porn that had nothing to do with whether these kids were ever going to get out of that school and get into a college and get a job where they could go somewhere and get a job saying, oh my God, trauma porn, like the rest of us middle-class people. Right. And that the whole school became that. And one year,
that's that. I mean, like this is another topic, but that's that white savior just bullshit that gets in you where it turns into tourism, right? I mean, where you're as a white person, your job becomes like this, like
except for
trauma tourism.
There's also this like with them, there was this like Vanilla Ice thing where they were telling other white people, you don't understand. Yeah. I know the real deal in the hood. I teach in the hood. You guys just don't know the real deal. So they became the kind of the counterfeit tourists. They wanted to act like they were locals, but they were really tourists, right? I like your word there. But anyways, the story just breaks down when there came a year, their test scores came out, they had made amazing progress. The news came out, and the principal had a lot of swag in her, and we didn't have to bust a union. We didn't have to start a charter school. We didn't have to be charterized. We didn't have to do any of the things they told us we had to do to make our test scores. All we had to do was love our babies and teach, blah, 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 blah. The next day, the superintendent figured out that they had given them the wrong scores, that they had given them another school scores, which actually did do good because they had teachers that could teach. So they came back. So the news came back to see the principal the next day, and to get her on record saying blah, blah, blah. She's bawling, tears coming out her eyes. We try so hard. We just love our babies, blah, blah, blah. And then they switched to another teacher in the hallway who they stop and talk to. And she says, we did nothing wrong. Kids walking all by and stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Right. Melting down, blah, blah, blah. Big, ugly cries. And I thought to myself, this is a shame. It's not a shame that this is happening to them and that they're feeling that bad about it. God knows I feel bad for you for that. It's a shame that these kids are in their company, that's who's teaching these kids, that life is so cruel that the kids who need the best teachers, the most composed, poised, put together teachers who can actually teach, don't get them. And these kids get the teachers who feel like they could cry their way out of it, right? We did nothing wrong, blah, blah, blah. It's all centering of self, right?
Yeah, because they just got to get through the end of the year, and then they get to start over next year. And that's how the testing cycle works, right?
And if you follow them on Facebook, you'll see that they vacation in the summer. They have lake homes. They have cabins. They have wakeboards. We're not a very big area, so you bump into the same people in different places or whatnot. And what you have to say is you're living okay. You're doing all right. Like, you're not the victim. I've had some pretty tough. I've worked in group homes. I've worked in situations in social services that'll make your head spin. I've seen some things that really make you sad. I've cried myself. I've written a lot of case notes. You know, this is why I don't have a ton of sympathy, because in social services, you see the toughest of the tough stuff that will make you go home and cry at night. And you have to write case notes every day that will make you cry while you're writing the case notes. But you also have to maintain composure, because what you're going through doesn't even match your client, what they're going through at that moment.
Right.
Like in their life.
Well, and you're not doing a service to the children in your charge if you're losing your composure in front of them. And that's not to say, again, that's not to say one should never cry in front of one's children or in front of one's students in an appropriate manner. But the kind of white tears we're talking about, that just that's just a signal that you're not necessarily helpful to the people under your charge.
Yeah,
and they don't.
I wanted to bring this up because I sent you this this blog post. It was actually a longer, I think, article or paper, but it was reposted by Sharif in Philly's 7th Ward. It's called Black Educators Share Their Thoughts on What Happens When White Women Cry in Schools. And this is part of like why we have this topic in the first place, because I never knew it was a topic. And I read this a while back, and it's deep. It was actually a study. It came off of a deep study into this. Dr. Kelly, I call her, actually is the one who wrote this and brought this up, and she had studied what happens when white women cry in schools, and then she interviewed some Black educators to ask them like their experience with it. And, you know, I'm not going to go through all of these. I'll put the link into the comments so that people can see them, but she talks to them, and then she has a story like at the end that kind of summarizes the takeaway from the story. And one of them is, where's the one right here? When white women are overwhelmed, entitled, or offended, tears create the eggshells we walk on to avoid being the target. The school becomes more about accommodating them than about educating children, right? And that's from a Black educator in a building with Black people, or with white women crying. There's several of those type of responses that they have when they talk to Black educators. Again, I didn't really know it was a thing. You know, I knew it from a parent perspective. Yeah. But when you hear Black educators feel like this is par for the course, and then you also know, you've heard Black educators say that they become like the dean. Like, people start, like, if you're a Black male educator, for sure, people start sending you their kids where they want you to straighten them out, and it's their student type of thing. Yeah. Well, I have to imagine that some of those people are also crying, you know, crying in your lap too about like the same students. That
the line you just read, it was interesting because I heard it through the lens again of, I know there's not a lot of male teachers relative to female, but I heard that through the lens again of thinking about my own white tears story, which is more like white frustration or white anger. And I could see, again, and also thinking back to that principal in Minnesota you were talking about, like, I could see a male version of that where maybe he doesn't cry when the news is there, but he just rails. He gets angry, and he's just like, we did the best we could, and we're doing the best we can for and he doesn't say babies, but he says scholars or whatever he says. And he just kind of like does what I did that day in the hallway and gets really angry, but it's the same self-centeredness. It turns the story back to him. And instead of being about the test scores or the school year or the students, it's about like, my frustration is this like righteous firebrand of an educator. And it's interesting.
I mean, at the risk of sounding a little bit sexist, at the risk of that,
Don't do it. Don't do it.
Well, don't you feel like sometimes because of sports culture in a lot of guys, they're conditioned to respond to things, especially like losses, in a way that shows no emotion, right?
Yeah.
Like, so they say things like after just a bruising loss in football, like something where you should just be ashamed of yourself and crawl through the hallway.
You should cry, right?
You should cry, and they'll say stuff like, "Well, we just didn't play our best game today, and the other team came to win." And you'll be thinking to yourself, "That's all you got right now? Like we didn't play our best game, and the other team, it was 54-0." And you're conditioned, I think, through years of suck it up, type of mentality that we do to boys, which is, might be a little bit different in the way that you would. I still think there's something too, though. The job is really hard. It might be the hardest thing you've ever done before. Mm-hmm. You come into it wanting to do such a good job. Maybe you've watched one or two of the wrong movies that made you think that it was going to be different than it actually is. And maybe it's the first time that you really have had a bruising loss. I mean, can you imagine being like an honor student or an AB student your whole life, having some distinctions in how well you did, getting the gold star on your homework, that sort of thing, going to college and doing equally as well, being really dutiful, and then showing up in a classroom and feeling like you completely wiped out.
Well, and here's the other side of that. And I read, I think it was, and I'm not sure if you say Teju, is it Teju Cole, Teju? I don't know how to say his name. But he wrote an article on white saviors a couple of years back. But he's talking about actual white Africa. Like he's talking about actual, missions and NGOs in Africa. But there was a line that was like, that really struck me. And it said something like Africa is the one place where a white person who's a nobody can go and like fashion themselves into a somebody, right? And that's like that's the myth that keeps drawing people to Africa. And it struck me that, and so the other side of this, as the white educator who's always got a gold star, who's always done the best and did all great in all the classes and could have had all these jobs, and instead chose to not just be a teacher, but to go teach in a really hard place. You get so much affirmation from the white people in your orbit for that. And that's just true. I mean, they'll say, "Oh, what are you doing?" You'll be like, "Oh, I'm a teacher." And they'll say, "Oh, where do you teach?" And if you tell them where they teach, and if they know what kind of school that is, they'll be like, "Wow, oh, really? Okay." I mean, and
so there's some cachet to it, like not cachet, but there's some street cred that, or is it pity? There's some pity that comes.
No. I mean, sometimes it's a little bit of pity, but sometimes it's just that street cred. It's like, "Oh, you must do good. Oh, you're doing such good work. Good for you." Yeah. And when I was young, it used to be, "Oh, the world needs more young people like you." Like, that was a long time ago.
Crazy about that type of thing. This is what drives, as you just said that, there's this, it's almost like you're so cool or you're so tough or you're so dedicated or, aren't you really special for going to teach the Negroes type of thing. And it's the same thing when people say like, our police officers just have a really tough job. Our teachers just have a really tough job. I think that's in some ways, that's like the thing that you say that's actually trying to put down the idea that the kids might be getting a raw deal or that the community members in terms of policing might be getting a raw deal. You say stuff like, you just don't know. The person who's like me, who's over those people, is really just doing the Lord's work, right? Like they just have such a tough job.
Well, it's part of the wages of the invisible wages of being a teacher is being being praised, right? I mean, just for like, oh, you're doing something good for, I mean, wherever you teach, like, the invisible wages of teaching is that you get praised at parties if you get invited by strangers who are just, "Oh, it's so good. We're so good. We have teachers. So good. It's so good." And then there's another level of that if you're white and if the person you're talking to knows the kind of school you teach in and or happens to know what part of town you teach in. But I was going to go back to that TFA teacher who spends their summer, and forget TFA, that's not even fair, but just the young, the young teacher who doesn't know what they're getting into, and they spend their summer being like, "Oh, I'm going into the city," and everyone around them is like, "Yo, the city, that's amazing, you're amazing," and it's like, "Yeah, I'm going to do 3 years and pay off my loans, and then I'm going to go to law school," and they're like, "Yes, you're an amazing person." And so add all that psychic praise, Chris. Add it all to the failure you feel in September when your class spins out of control because you don't know how to manage it. and everything falls apart, or your lesson plans don't work. Or maybe you do make it to the first benchmark assessment and none of your kids know anything. Or maybe you make it all the way to May and none of your kids know anything because you've been praised. You've been being praised by all your friends and family all year. I mean, they were just constantly saying, "Oh, you're doing such a good thing. Like, good for you." So not only have you been good at school your whole life and you're choosing to do a hard thing, you're constantly being affirmed for it. It's no wonder they cry. I get it.
You get why they cry. I mean, like, listen, I would cry for about 10 minutes and then I would join a union. And then it'd be all okay. I wouldn't have to worry about doing anything good after that. I could just
loop back. Let's loop back to the word lament and some good tears.
Okay.
And maybe a way forward, or at least a look forward is, so I can say, I mean, one of the times I can, because I was thinking about this ahead of this. One of the times I've cried, and I think was constructive for me, was I told you I cry mostly at books and movies, but I had been reading Beloved, Toni Morrison's Beloved, it was my second time through, and I got to the very end, and I had no real emotion the whole time except like, great book, blah blah blah. And I got to the end, and I closed the book and I just burst into tears. And I was alone. I was in my classroom. I happened to be actually. During a planning period, and I just started crying, and it was just the weight of the whole book, and slavery and Reconstruction and the convict leasing that Paul D gets caught up in, and just everything, and that I think was a good moment for me. I don't that to me was some lamenting where the story went from here to here in some tiny way. I'm not sure it would have been appropriate to do that in front of somebody else, or certainly unless it was someone I knew really well. My point is this: like, how do we create spaces for white people to cry at some appropriate things? Because I would argue that the history represented so well in Beloved is worth crying about. When you can finally like put yourself in that story a little bit. So how do we create a space for that? Like without. So anyway, go.
I mean, you say go like I have an answer to that one. Wow.
Okay, no answers. Just look forward. I don't know.
Yeah.
This is what I don't want is I don't want someone to walk away from hearing us and just be like, okay, don't hold it together. Don't cry. Like that's not what I'm saying. It's like you referenced. I always listen to 8 Black Hands like Tuesday morning. It's just the way my podcast cycle works. So. But you referenced Ecclesiastes this week, like a time to kill, a time to die, a time to be born. And there's a time to cry. There is a time to cry, and there is a time not to cry. And so I do want white people to we need to figure out how to lament. And I would encourage all white people to read that Michael Dyson book. I think it's great. And figure out a way to lament. And hopefully that will be some tears for you. Maybe in private or with like close trusted friends. And maybe that's just the answer is like white people don't hold it in all the time.
I mean, there could be like a lot of different answers. I mean, it might just be different to the person, but I'm glad you brought up Ecclesiastes because it's kind of my go-to book on the stopping you from falling into needless depressions or needless overthinking of the world. There's a thing like and don't quote me on this, I'm not like an expert on the Buddhism part, but there is a thing about Buddhism where it takes two people to be in a tug of war. So if you ever want to win a tug of war, let go of the rope. Just stop pulling on a thing. And if you don't want to ever be disappointed by anything, don't expect anything. If you don't ever want to be unhappy, don't expect things. Don't want things, right? Like you're causing your own human suffering by wanting and by struggling, right? And so in those moments where you're about to cry or freak out like that, the idea is to let go of the rope. It's whatever the rope is at that moment, you let go of it, right? And you let whatever the other side, you let them have it. You forfeit whatever it is at that moment. But that's just my strategy. And the other thing is, I feel kind of like a jackass, like saying, don't cry, right? Because crying, I want to go back to what I said in the beginning. Crying is like it's a normal human thing. And I was trying, as you were talking, trying to think about like when I was in social services, like, did I have those moments? And, it did come to me, like, as you were talking, I've talked about this a little bit, and this is all these years ago. This is why it still sticks with me. It was little things like helping somebody find an apartment and getting them in for the first time and walking in and having their kids like yell things like it's the first time they've ever had a bedroom, right? And meanwhile, I'm going home knowing that my kids have bedrooms. And so it all clicks to me and it makes me very emotional in that moment, right? Of course, like, you know, I'm not going to get misty about it until I get in the car and I'm going away. But I'm like, these kids were just so excited, you know, 1 year to get socks for Christmas or to have their own bedroom or to have things that my kids take for granted, right? And it's very affecting. It's not, you know, in those moments, I'm not misty or wanting to cry because I feel like I failed or anything like that. It's just that the job gets to you sometimes like that. You know, it builds up in you and you see that society is not fair. So I only tell that story to say, you know, maybe I'm being a jackass for telling people, oh, you know, crying is horrible. You know, don't melt down and don't cry. I think centering is the thing. It's not the crying that I should point out. When you're centering yourself as a victim type in a moment where you are the leader of society's victims in your classroom, you've got, in some cases, 30 to 35 of society's victims in your care, in your charge, and you're so lost up in your own self and your own emotions. I mean, how good can you be for them if you're thinking about you?
I think what's good advice probably to advice to the white person who might want to cry.
Don't give them any more advice. That's the problem we're trying to get rid of.
I would say no more articles for white people. Make sure you pronounce the names correctly. Chris, is so hard over Zoom, like trying to like get everybody. We're teaching virtually. I'm 3 weeks in now, and like getting the names right. And I have a big, this is an aside, I have a big Latinx population this year. And I really want to get the names right. And the kids are just like, I don't worry about it. I'm like, no, I want to worry about it. Let me say what I was gonna say. Cause when you were talking about, you know, crying at the end of a social service visit or whatever, I was thinking about times that and dozens and dozens of times I've had a teenager, tell me something that just horrible things. Either about something going on with them or a family member or whatever. And I've gone home and cried. I mean, I've usually by the time I get home and tell my wife, I can't, like, I just have to cry. It's a reaction to like, what's a really hard situation. But it would be inappropriate for me to cry in front of the teenager unless they're crying too. Right. Like, and it's not to say that if that child's crying, I can't cry with them, but if they're just telling me a story and they're kind of stone faced and like, if they're not crying, I'm not sure they're looking for me to break down weeping in front of them. That might not be a universal rule, but it might be. We might be able to write this article. But something about like it's okay to go home and cry. It's okay to cry in front of like. So to think about these, D'Angelo tells all these stories about white women in trainings, and they're the only person crying in the whole room, and that's like a signal that something's off, right? If you all of a sudden are, because it's that word centering. It's all of a sudden everyone's looking at you, right? If the whole room's weeping about something, like, of course it's okay to cry. Like, white or black, you're allowed to cry if the whole room's crying, right? I mean,
do you think though, like part of it too is, this is the part that I wouldn't see not being in schools, but part of it is you're so close to these kids at times, you do start to think of, especially if you're a parent already, of like being like your kids in a way that maybe I don't understand, or maybe like somebody on the other side, but you're with them every day. Right. And they're telling you really important things about themselves. So you're getting to know them. They start to feel a little bit like they are your kid. And then they tell you something really devastating that they've experienced or whatnot. Yeah. It's not like you're just some random professional, I don't know, objective person at that point. I mean, maybe you are like, I don't know. Maybe there's something to it that I don't see. I know it from like being the Black activist, the education activist point of view, that these are our kids and we need them to learn. We need them to learn to read. We need them to learn to do math. We need them to be successful like you are. When you come from that angle at it, you know, I can see why the crying would be like a problem, like thinking about it. But, you know, I think part of like a discussion like this, even for me, is I'm really trying. I try to understand. I try to see like, you know, empathy is being able to put yourself into another person's situation and feel it, like understand it. So I am like trying to think through, okay, if that were me, which is what makes me say I probably would become somewhat attached to kids if you're going to work with them every day. And you have kids at home, you know how this happens, like how you become invested in their dreams or whatever, and then they have a problem. Something happens to them that's really tough. If I'm being empathetic about the person in that situation, I could see how that would, that would be a problem.
And that's why we can't write this article about what the rules are, because you know what, that child might have sought you out to tell you something because they need you to cry, because they know what kind of person you are, and that's the permission they need to feel something. I mean, people are complicated, so I take back my rules. That's a bad rule.
You take them back.
I take it back.
So listen, you also wanted to talk about the 17-year-old in Wisconsin.
Yeah, that's the subject switch, right? Let's do it.
Yeah. You wanted to talk about this kid. So Kenosha, Wisconsin, it's blowing up. I don't know if anybody listening or watching has been to Kenosha. I have. It's not like it's the biggest place in the world, you know.
To me, you live really close to Kenosha, but probably you don't. Like, I'm like,
no, we're far ways. Yeah, we're ways away. I think the way I know Kenosha is coming back from Chicago, driving from Chicago back to Minnesota.
To me, everywhere near the Great Lakes is all kind of the same. Like, you're on the west side of the lake, to the like New York or like
Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota. You guys are all the same. Kenosha is, I think, on a far end away from us too in Wisconsin. So it's a ways, but it's small. It's not like it's some big place. It's blowing up. Of course, everybody probably knows, unless you've been living under a rock, that there was a kid who comes up there from Illinois who, probably watched a little bit too much Fox News. And probably watched a little bit too Fox News, came up armed to the teeth, and his mom was armed. And they both came up there. They were going to help defend property against them BLMers. They were going to come up there and stop the BMLs from ruining city, whatever. And he ends up shooting somebody, killing two people and injuring a third. And then walking away from it, walking right into the glaring lights of the police, who he's like waving them in some ways, doing hand signals to them and stuff. And they're driving right by him, They had seen him earlier in the day. Kid gets arrested. He's being charged. And the president of the United States basically takes his side. If people hadn't been looting and rioting or whatnot, it wouldn't be compelling people to want to join militias and go up and save things, right?
Yeah. And
I'm thinking about like the kid that shot all the black people in the church, and they bought him Burger King on the way to the jail,
which is one of the worst stories that I like. That makes me so mad. Like, that's like terrible story. Okay, sorry. Go.
And there's others, right? So this is just my point. Is like, we had a Congress that invented something when Trump came in called Black Identity Extremist, which is something that didn't exist as a threat, as a domestic terrorist threat. And they went and found the most weird, outlandish groups of folks to put on that list like it was a real threat. But they wouldn't designate these white killers nationally who have been responsible for most of the domestic terrorism as domestic terrorists, even though they're sophisticated, they're sharing platforms with each other across state lines, and they have these really weird kind of 4chan type of channels with each other, and they're plotting violence.
Yes,
they're literally plotting violence. And so when I see the 17-year-old shooting, I mean, listen, we talk about him as the 17-year-old kid. We don't talk about him like a murderer. We don't talk about him, the way that they talk about a lot of our victims that start these protests in the first place. They talk about them as thugs.
So, yeah,
right?
so
10 minutes after, I'll just say this one last thing. 10 minutes after another 17-year-old named Trayvon Martin was killed, 10 minutes after they started indicting him for his own murder.
Yes.
I've been saying that for years. It's true.
Continues to this day.
To this day.
Not inadvertently, I was Trayvon's birthday. I tweeted on Trayvon's birthday. I like turned to my class and I was like, "Guys, y'all like remember Trayvon Martin?" And they barely did. And it occurred to me, oh my goodness, like they were all they don't remember a time. They don't remember. They were like 4 and 5 years old, I think. And I tweeted something about it, and within minutes, I had a Trayvon Martin conspiracy theory guy on my thread like showing me maps about all like Trayvon's, like it would look like the JFK files. I mean, like what he was doing to like get to like attack. What's his name? I can't remember his name. George Zimmerman. Anyway, it was crazy, and he wouldn't leave me alone, all because I just like tweeted out this thing like, can't believe my students like were babies when Trayvon Martin was killed. Like, so I want to read a quote from, and I didn't know this. I read this quote today. I didn't know the lawmaker by name, so I had to look him up. But his J.A. Moore is his name, and he's new from South Carolina as a young black guy. I mean, new, like 2018 new. And he said just almost basically what you just said, but he said, if he's talking about Kyle Rittenhouse, he says, if he was black, he would be a thug, but because he's white, he's a young man. Mm-hmm. Moore goes on to say, not a young man, he's a murderer. Mm-hmm. And it reinforces the like two Americas that we live in. And you didn't even talk about all the money that's been raised from all these like groups for Kyle's like defense fund or whatever. Right. I mean, and probably he'll have a college nest egg out of it when he comes out of this. I mean, and the two Americas we live in where a 17-year-old, black child, let's still say, with a bag of Skittles is more of a criminal than a 17-year-old young man with an AR-15, right? And okay, so I'm gonna stop. And
no, keep going. I mean, I think it's interesting just in that, like, what I thought about when you were just saying that just now is we know that the value of black life and the value of white life is different in the United States, right? We just know that. And that's the reason you have a saying like Black Lives Matter,
right?
Which now we have to argue about, does that mean that no other lives matter? Which is, I think that's just willful ignorance. That's just like what white supremacy does. It like self-cleans. So it just does that on purpose. Like, it'll never take a claim or a charge head on. It doesn't have to. It's white supremacy. And
anybody that like bounces back with all lives matter is almost not worth talking to. I mean, that's what I've found. I mean, like there's three types of white people. There's people that like say Black Lives Matter already. There's people that have started saying it in the past couple months, and then there's people that'll never say it, right? And the people that'll never say it, like if they didn't come around this summer, like they're done. It's not worth it.
There's a group of people that not only will they not say it, they get hostile.
Yes, right, and that's what I mean.
Like they feel like it's an offense against America.
They want to argue.
They want to argue about it, but at bottom, the reason that discussion even exists is because there is a difference in black life and white life in the United States. And if you're a white young person who kills 3 people, you're a 17-year-old kid. If you're a black 17-year-old who went to buy Skittles and iced tea and you come home dead, you were a thug. You shouldn't have been wearing the hoodie, right? It gets no clearer than that, right? There's so many videos of white folks doing incredibly like aggressive things to police officers and they still get taken in alive, right? Anyways, it's hard to go ahead.
I was just gonna say, there was over the summer, there was one Twitter thing that went around where all these white people were just sharing all the kind of quasi-aggressive things they had done and said to cops over their lives, right? I mean, arguing over tickets to like yelling or, I'm going to talk to your sergeant, I mean, like all kinds of like shit that quite frankly, like black people don't have the luxury to get away with. Right. Mm-hmm. I was thinking there was a phrase I thought that when you were talking, just that a black child, or a black man, person is guilty until proven innocent, whereas Kyle gets to be innocent until he's proven guilty. Right. And America's promising us the latter, that we're innocent until proven guilty, but that's just over and over again proven not to be the case from Jacob Blake on back to George Floyd, on back to Ahmaud Arbery, on back to Trayvon Martin, and way back, right? I mean, and it's just what you said. I mean, the instant Ahmaud Arbery was a great one. Like the second that video came out, it was like half a day later, like we're watching videos of him walking around a construction site. Like for what? Like, does that mean he should have been shot down in the street by some like?
That's what I feel every single time when they bring up something. I'm like, oh yeah, that means he should have died. Like they always bring up weird stuff, and you're kind of like, oh, well, he had like some weed in his system. Oh yeah, we should kill everybody who has weed in their system. Let's do it.
Yeah. I mean,
let's go ahead and tell everybody who tests positive for weed. Let's just kill them all, and let's test everyone, and then kill them all the next day, right?
And the Jacob Blake stuff too with I mean, now it's the same level of conspiracy about like where was the knife and who had the knife and how was the knife and the knife was here and he was reaching here and he would and it's just like, why does a knife equal a gun? Like it doesn't, right? I mean, like you're holding a gun and he's holding a knife and he got shot in the back and something's wrong with that. Like did Jacob Blake do everything right? I don't know, probably not, right? Something was going bad, but does gun back knife, like it just doesn't add up. But yet, and this is the point of the guilty until proven innocent, is that the second anything happens, it's just like it's like we start just dredging it up, right? Oh, like Trayvon Martin, he texted a girl earlier that night and said something nasty to her or whatever. I don't even know if that's true. I just mean like they would, right? They would drag that up. That's why he was killed. I don't know.
So take that kid, take that black child who's at the center of a lot of things. Let's just make kind of a persona of a black child who's the Trayvon kid. The right wing will make him a thug when something goes wrong for him. When something goes wrong for him, the goal is to say that the system didn't do anything wrong. It was something immutable about the kid, something within the condition of the kid that caused it. So then the kid will be indicted for his own supposed failure.
Right.
And the educational version of that I think I like to be very challenging about. Yeah. The educational version of that is the white person who also wants to get the system off the hook for doing a bad thing. And again, it's because the reason they're not doing well in school is because they have bad parents or they're hungry or something about their condition means that their brain isn't elastic and that they can't learn like everyone else. Not that you just haven't been taught to teach this group of kids. Maybe you're like a family practice doctor type teacher and what you need is emergency room teachers in certain schools and you're mismatched. I don't know if that's the right analogy, but I'm just saying.
No, I get it.
The right and the left of white folks have very similar ways of doing things, even though they're in dispute with each other constantly. They're always bickering with each other like they're not the same, like they're really different. But at the end of the day, they really do believe in their systems. On the right, they really believe in police departments and police officers and their courts and judges and the Constitution. Those things are all super meaningful to them. It's their whole life. And on the left, they really believe that public schools are the cornerstone of democracy and that education and progressive education is the thing that makes us great as a country. And if you're a person who challenges any of those things on the right and the left, the response will be almost identical. It'll just be coming from a different white direction.
Yeah, they're both essentialized. Yeah. And that's not where I thought you were going to take it when you said education, but I think you're totally right. And I'll loop back. I'll come back in a second. I was going to just go on to talk about the way that this narrative about Kyle and Trayvon or Kyle and Jacob or whatever, the way it gets into our teachers' skulls and it results in all this like disproportionate discipline and not even forget discipline, just disproportionate way we talk to kids in the class. And we hear white kids' questions and we answer them, and we don't hear the black kids' questions and they don't get answered. And right. because we're looking at two 17-year-olds and one of them's a cute, pudgy young man and one of them's soon to be thug, right? And those are the narratives that get pushed to us forever. I mean, time out of mind. Now, that's what I thought you were going to say, and that is a problem. But let's go back to your problem because
yours is probably better than mine. So no. We got to wrap on it. Whatever it is, we got to wrap on it. So,
yeah. Well, maybe we'll come back to both of them.
So where do we land on all these things? White tears, the difference in black and white life, and the entitlement and the privilege that exist in both the white teacher who cries and the 17-year-old who kills people and doesn't get indicted as being a murderer is still just seen as a 17-year-old kid who did something wrong. Is there a lesson here? You're a teacher, Jay. Is there a lesson in any of this?
I think the lesson is that it is just work for it doesn't matter what your political leanings are. And I read a really good quote. It said like your opinion of Kyle Rittenhouse is probably wrong. he was not a hero vigilante, nor was he a predatory white supremacist. He was, the evidence suggests, just a foolish boy whose foolish decisions have taken 2 lives and ruined his own. I can't speak to like the veracity of that quote, but I can speak to what I can't know if you and I have talked about this before, but I've talked about this a lot, and I know you've talked about it a lot, about like Black people get one mistake and that's it, right? And white people, white children have the privilege to make mistakes, and they have the privilege to and maybe not. And I don't know, even this kid, like he might serve 3 to 5 years, and he'll get out, and someone will pay for his college, and he'll be fine 10 years from now. If he was Black, he would never see the light of day again, right? And you and I know that. The lesson is that like we've got a lot of work to do, and the media and our own histories, white people, the media and our own histories are feeding us just a steady diet of white privilege and supremacy and Black devaluation. And even when we like start to learn about it, we leak out with unhelpful tears. And we've got to not just like, I'm going to go back to that word lament. We've got to not just learn. We've got to figure out how to put ourselves in these stories. And what I mean by that is like, what do I as a teacher do with this like narrative of Kyle Rittenhouse? Like I got to go back into my classroom and start asking really hard questions about how do I treat Black children and how do I treat white children? I got to start taking data on myself. And now's not the time maybe with Zoom, but that is something that has always been recommended to white teachers, is to start like tracking how often let's just track the race of everybody you call on for 5 weeks and see what that looks like, because you'd be surprised supposedly. Not just like who gets suspended, but who gets your attention, right?
Right. When they raise their hand, who do you go to when they don't raise their hand?
Yes.
You ever like cold call people out and make them, and you're not going to get, in some cases, the best response that's going to satisfy you. So maybe just skip over doing that. Right. Yeah. But that becomes a message in itself, becomes a message to the kid over time, and they absorb those. I don't think that there's any easy answer in any of this. I think the conversations are good to have. I appreciate the conversation just in general and talking across difference. And I just don't think that everything needs an answer right away. I think that people are in process. And as long as people like consider themselves as imperfect and in process, I feel really good about what they're doing and what I'm doing and what we're all doing. It's when people are so certain about something and they're still doing damage. That's one way of getting under my skin. The other one is you can't do helping work if you center yourself. You can't do missionary work in another country. You can't do medicine. You can't do any type of helping occupation if you center yourself too much. The ego investment has to drop out of your body, or else it's going to be very tough for you or your patient, your client, your missionary target, whoever you're working with. If they can't have you decenter yourself, stop asking questions about what I do and do I do this and do I do that and blah, 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 and really start really thinking through what's the external world analysis of what's happening to this person I'm trying to help right now, and be pretty cold and calculated and sober about knowing the analysis and then going with it, right? What country are you going to? Why are you being sent there? What's the political analysis of what's going on there? What's your role? Get in, do your role, do it really well, and get out, make sure that they were helped in some sort of way. I don't know that that's realistic. I don't know that it's reasonable, but I'm okay if people are trying. If they're trying to change, it drives me crazy. I say stuff about them all the time. I get really cynical. These books that people read, you and I, over 2 or 3 of these shows, have made fun of people reading books over a weekend and then feeling like, yeah, I did something, Yeah. Maybe I shouldn't be so hard on that. Maybe I shouldn't be.
As much as we made fun of white fragility a couple of times ago, like I quoted it a couple of times tonight because there's something there.
You sure did. I didn't call you on it. You sure did.
There's good. There's
good.
Good.
A hard time before.
All books are good, Chris. There's good in all books.
Beloved is a horrible book. I hate to say it.
No. Oh no, really?
It's a terrible book. It's a horrible book. It's like it doesn't have any punctuation. It's like one long sentence.
Oh, you're so wrong. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to tell you that.
I don't even know how it made it out of the gate. It literally doesn't have any punctuation for pages.
Chris, we'll have to talk about that some other time.
Yeah. You know what? There's a lot of great books that I hate.
I
that are other people's favorites, where I think the movie is better.
Do you read fiction though? That's the question. I'm not trying to embarrass you in front of your friends, but you know, if you're not a fiction reader, like Beloved might be a little.
You know, it's funny because I have read a lot of short stories, and when I was younger, I used to read way more, like Ray Bradbury and stuff like that. Used to be really like my thing. I was like into that, and I got into Stephen King at some point, and it ruined it for me because he would have a great book, and then a horrible book. You know, it'd just be like, I bought that. You know,
in the same book, or you mean like
different books? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you'd read one and then you'd think, oh man, this dude is great. And then another, and he is great in all that he does. But you get to a book like, I forgot the one about the trucks and stuff, and truck drivers, you know, spontaneously coming to life and stuff like that. It was just terrible. So anyways, I read way more nonfiction now.
I'm gonna
all right, my friend. Well, we have saved the world again. We have saved the world of all its troubles.
except for this Toni Morrison thing, but we'll have to fix you later about that. I'm not sure.
I mean, I saw the movie.
Yeah, the movie wasn't very good though, if I remember.
The movie was kind of funny because I couldn't tell if it was meant to be funny.
Yeah,
and I'm pretty sure it wasn't. But for some reason, I found it hilarious. And I shouldn't have, probably. Anyways, well, we will come back to Toni Morrison and Beloved maybe on the next time around. And that will probably lead us into a discussion, I think, about centering white curriculum, or centering the Black curriculum that white people think Blacks all agree with or believe in. That might be a good topic too. Right?
You spun that good. Yeah, I can't wait.
All right. Well, thank you, Jay, as always, for giving a Wednesday night up. Do great work, my friend. Do great work during the week. Try and survive it. The Zoomination of education.
Here we are.
People have worried about privatization. They should have been worried about Zoomification of education. So to everybody who came and watched and saw, we thank you again. It's nighttime, and it's really cool that you would come and listen and be a part of this on a Wednesday night. Really appreciate you all for watching.